Okay, let's unpack this. Think back through history with me for a moment. How often has a truly radical new idea or movement burst onto the scene only to be met with fierce opposition, even outright hostility?
Yeah, it happens a lot.
It's a recurring pattern across centuries, isn't it? And today, we're diving deep into a particularly compelling example of this phenomenon playing out on, well, a global stage.
What's fascinating here is that our central source for this exploration, a document titled The Promised Day Has Come, offers a really unique lens, a way to view this very process.
Right.
Penned nearly a century after the emergence of the Bahá'í Faith in the 19th century, which followers believe represents the new divine message, this document reflects on its initial reception by the world.
Exactly. And this isn't just some localized account. This document takes a panoramic view. It looks at how this new faith was perceived by a whole spectrum of society, from the most powerful political and religious figures right down to everyday people, all against the backdrop of a century marked by, well, pretty dramatic global transformations.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the document emphasizes a core Bahá'í belief that the teachings brought by Baha'u'lláh surpass all previous divine revelations in their scope and completeness.
That's a huge claim.
It is. It's a significant claim, and the author underscores the immense personal sacrifices Baha'u'lláh made in proclaiming this message.
So our goal today really is to understand the perspective offered by this document on how the world initially reacted. How did people respond to this new faith?
Yeah, what was the reception like?
And we're going to be paying particular attention to the responses of those who held positions of influence, the powerful figures, and the consequences that the document suggests unfolded because of those reactions. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Indeed. The document doesn't shy away from detailing the intense initial resistance and outright persecution that the early adherents faced.
Yeah.
We're talking about widespread and often brutal opposition.
And when the document describes it as intense, it's not an understatement, is it? It recounts numerous instances of imprisonment, exile,
And even martyrdom.
yeah, martyrdom on a massive scale, a truly staggering 20,000 individuals who chose their new faith, even, facing death.
Which really raises a fundamental question. What fueled such relentless opposition? What was behind it?
Exactly.
The document points to various accusations that were leveled against the faith during its early years.
It's quite a list they faced. They were accused of everything from nihilism, challenging the established order and occultism,
Tapping into those societal anxieties about the unknown.
to anarchism, reflecting fears of political instability, and even immorality. It's striking how new movements are often framed through the lens of existing societal anxieties, isn't it?
It really is. And what's fascinating here is the document's direct counter-argument, that the core principles of the faith and the actual behavior of its followers unequivocally refuted these accusations.
Right.
It suggests these were largely baseless attempts to, well, discredit and suppress the movement.
But the opposition wasn't solely characterized by violence, was it? The document also highlights the indifference shown by prominent figures. Indifference, the outright animosity from established religious authorities, particularly from the Islamic tradition it emerged from.
Right, which is a key point.
Though-
And that imprisonment in the Siachal, the dark pit in Iran, is particularly significant. The document details the intense physical hardship he endured there,
Terrible.
and the lasting effects of that stayed with him for the rest of his life.
And following this came a series of banishments, right? Each taking him further from his homeland,
That's right, first to Iraq, then to Adrianople, and ultimately to Akka.
which was a penal colony in the Ottoman Empire, known as the Most Great Prison.
The most great prison, exactly. And tragically, the document also recounts the martyrdom of one of Baha'u'llah's own sons,
Yeah.
further illustrating the immense personal cost he bore.
Wow. This sustained period of hardship and persecution really sets the stage for the document's next focus,
Yeah.
those direct addresses to the world's leaders.
It's quite a shift.
It's a stark contrast, profound suffering on one side, and a direct appeal to those in power on the other. What do you make of that juxtaposition?
It's striking, isn't it? Given the intense suffering endured by Baha'u'lláh and his followers, it's maybe surprising that the document then turns its attention to direct appeals to the very powers that often, well, orchestrated this persecution.
Yeah, why them?
The author's perspective, as outlined in the text, seemed to be that these individuals held immense worldly power and influence,
Okay.
and therefore Their response, or their lack of response, would have profound implications for the trajectory of this new faith.
And the document doesn't shy away from making a rather bold prophecy right at the outset of this discussion. The eventual seizure of power from kings and ecclesiastics, that's a powerful and quite direct challenge to the established order.
It certainly is, and the document proceeds to offer specific instances of the rulers who were directly addressed by Baha'u'lláh.
We're talking about a real pantheon of 19th century global power here.
A who's who, really.
Napoleon III of France, Pope Pius IX, Tsar Alexander II of Russia, Queen Victoria of Britain, William I of Prussia, Germany, Francis Joseph of Austria-Hungary, Abdulaziz of the Ottoman Empire, and Nair-ud-din Shah of Persia.
Quite the list. It covers a lot of ground.
It's a veritable who's who of the era's most influential figures.
Precisely. And the nature of the messages sent to these leaders wasn't uniform. The document categorizes them into several key types.
So what kind of messages were these rulers actually receiving from Baha'u'lláh? What was he saying?
Well, some were direct invitations to recognize and heed this new revelation, offering explanations of its fundamental truth.
Okay, kind of an introduction.
Right. Others recounted the immense suffering endured by Baha'u'lláh and his followers, bringing that to their attention.
Right.
Crucially, there were also stark warnings about the consequences of rejecting what was presented as God's message.
Warnings, okay.
And intertwined with these warnings were predictions of what would transpire if they chose to ignore it.
And the document doesn't just broadly characterize these messages. It provides specific excerpts, actual quotes from these communications.
Yeah, it gets specific.
Let's delve into a few of those. What particular message stood out to you?
Well, the address directed towards the Christian monarchs is quite direct. It questions their failure to acknowledge what Baha'u'lláh asserted was the return of Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Referencing Jesus' own prophecies about his future coming.
That's a pretty powerful opening. And then there's the Báb, the forerunner figure, who issued a call to all kings and princes to relinquish their sovereignty,
Right.
declaring that true dominion belongs to God alone. That's a pretty fundamental challenge to their authority, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the message sent to Napoleon III is particularly striking. It essentially tells the clergy to stop ringing their church bells, because the most mighty bell, a clear reference to Baha'u'lláh, had appeared.
So a direct challenge to establish religious practices.
Very direct, very symbolic.
And to Pope Pius IX, Baha'u'lláh proclaims that the Lord of Lords is come overshadowed with clouds, essentially announcing the arrival of the prophesied one.
I mean, these are incredibly direct and, frankly, audacious claims being made to the most powerful religious figures of the time.
No kidding. What about the secular rulers?
Turning our attention there, the message to William I of Germany refers to him as the dayspring of divine revelation and includes a prophecy concerning the Rhine River and the city of Berlin.
Which we'll probably come back to.
Which we'll explore in more detail later, yes.
And the communication directed to Emperor Francis Joseph of Austria-Hungary pointedly notes that he had passed by the dayspring of God's light, Baha'u'lláh himself, then imprisoned in Akka
Right there.
during his pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and had not even inquired about him. That's a very personal and somewhat pointed rebuke.
It feels that way, yes. Then to Abdulaziz, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Baha'u'lláh explicitly denies any intention of rebellion and even offers prayers for his well-being, while also including a significant prophecy about Constantinople, the empire's capital city.
Okay. And finally, in his message to Nair-ud-din Shah of Persia,
Baha'u'lláh addresses him with the traditional title, God's Shadow, a term used to denote, divinely sanctioned authority for rulers in that region, and urges him to uphold justice.
So using their own framework.
Exactly. And this communication even includes a past warning from the Báb to the previous Shah, Muhammad Shah, about the consequences of opposing what he declared to be God's remembrance.
So there's history there.
These excerpts really give you a strong sense of the directness and the perceived significance of these messages.
They really do. And this leads us naturally to the subsequent and quite pivotal section of the document, its argument concerning the consequences. What happened after these messages were sent or ignored?
Right. The consequences that befell these leaders as a result of their rejection, as the document sees it. The author presents this unfolding of events as a moving drama.
A moving drama. So according to the document, how did these powerful figures actually respond to these direct appeals, and what were the outcomes that followed?
Well, the document recounts that the reactions were varied, ranging from outright disrespect and even violence directed at the messengers, to contemptuous silence and just a general failure to offer any meaningful assistance. With one minor exception, none of these powerful figures actually heeded the call.
Okay, so general rejection or indifference.
Pretty much. And the document interprets these subsequent historical events through the lens of what it terms retributive justice.
Retributive justice.
Suggesting a direct causal link between their failure to heed what they were told was a divine summons and the misfortunes that later befell them.
That's a strong interpretation. Does the document acknowledge any other potential contributing factors to these historical events, like political or economic forces?
Well, while the document primarily focuses on the spiritual dimension of these events, it does present a narrative where the rejection of the divine message is the primary catalyst for the subsequent downturn in their fortunes.
Okay.
It then proceeds to detail what it characterizes as the humiliation immediate and complete of several of these key individuals, starting with Napoleon III.
Right, Napoleon III. The document draws a direct line between his rejection of Baha'u'llah's message and his subsequent dramatic downfall, doesn't it?
It does. The Crimean War, his defeat by Prussia, and ultimately his exile. It paints a vivid picture of a, once seemingly invincible ruler brought low.
Beyond this specific interpretation, what does this suggest about the broader relationship between, say, ignoring new ideas and the potential for unforeseen consequences in leadership?
That's a great question. It certainly raises questions about the ability of leaders to maybe discern and adapt to changing realities, whether spiritual or otherwise. Similarly, the document points to Pope Pius IX. He held significant temporal and spiritual authority.
Right, the Papal States.
Exactly. And the document highlights his declining worldly power, culminating in the loss of the Papal States in 1870 and the Pope's symbolic status as the prisoner of the Vatican.
And Tsar Alexander II, what's the connection made there?
The document connects the initial warnings he received to the subsequent Russian Revolution and the eventual overthrow of his dynasty.
Wow.
Suggesting that his failure to heed the message contributed, in the document's view, to this seismic shift in Russian history.
And Kaiser William I and the German Empire.
Their downfall is also interpreted, in part, as a consequence of his disregard for Baha'u'llah's warnings, specifically referencing that prophecy concerning the Rhine and Berlin.
Ah, yes.
And his ultimately consequential dismissal of Otto von Bismarck.
We're seeing a pattern emerge in the document's interpretation of these historical events. What about the Austro-Hungarian Empire under Francis Joseph?
The document posits that his failure to even inquire about Baha'u'lláh during his visit to the Holy Land, despite having the opportunity.
When he was right there in Akkad.
Right there. That this failure was linked to the eventual disintegration of his sprawling empire.
And then there's the Ottoman Empire, a major power at the time.
A huge power. The document details its protracted decline and eventual collapse, attributing this trajectory in part to the responses of Sultan Abdulaziz and his successors to Baha'u'llah's pronouncements.
Including that prophecy about Constantinople.
Including that prophecy, yes. It traces the empire's dissolution right through to the establishment of the secular Turkish Republic and the abolishment of the Caliphate.
Which was a massive event.
Huge. And the document also presents the fate of the Qajar dynasty in Persia, starting with the assassination of Nair-din Shah.
Who received that direct message.
Who received that message, yes. Leading to a series of revolutions and the eventual deposition of the last Shahs as a direct consequence, the document argues, of their persistent opposition to the Bahá'í Faith.
And the scope of this interpretation is quite broad, isn't it? The document even briefly touches upon the declining fortunes of other monarchies.
Yeah, it mentions China, Portugal, Spain, the Scandinavian nations.
Right. As further evidence of this sort of retributive justice playing out on the world stage.
And it even includes a quote from the Surah-i-Mulk, one of Baha'u'llah's major works, about the inevitable consequences of ignoring God's message. It's a pretty sweeping claim the document is making.
It is. And the document draws a clear parallel between this perceived decline in temporal authority in kings and emperors and what it describes as the crumbling of religious orthodoxy. It reiterates that powerful statement we mentioned earlier, power hath been seized, kings and ecclesiastics.
Both sides of the coin, so to speak.
So just as the earthly rulers faced these consequences, according to the document, the argument is that religious leaders also experienced a similar diminution of their influence.
Precisely. The document contends that the actions of religious leaders, particularly their often vehement opposition to the emergence of this new faith, actually contributed to the weakening of their own institutions and their standing within society.
So ironically, their opposition kind of backfired in this view.
That's the argument being made, yes. And the document provides specific instances highlighting interactions and criticisms directed at these religious figures by both Baha'u'lláh and the Báb.
What kind of criticisms?
Well, they were invited to engage in dialogue, accused of obstructing their followers from seeking truth, and prioritizing their positions of authority over genuine spiritual inquiry.
And again, we encounter direct excerpts from their writings, right?
Yes. Baha'u'llah's strong censures found in the Kitab-i-Quran, a foundational theological text, and the explicit commands and warnings within the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the Book of Laws.
Okay.
These are highlighted, as are his persistent appeals for fairness and justice. And the Báb's specific letters addressed to prominent religious figures are also referenced.
And there are some remarkably strong pronouncements quoted. Baha'u'lláh prophesying future torment for those who actively oppose Dothosan, a revered figure.
A key early figure, yes.
Expressing his deep sorrow over the cruelty exhibited by religious leaders, and stating that Persian divines had committed unprecedented acts of oppression.
He even directly commands them to set aside their material possessions and essentially just listen attentively to the new message.
And that addressed to a specific, influential mujtahid, a high-ranking Islamic cleric referred to as the Heedless One.
In the La-i-Burhan, yes. That is particularly potent, underscoring the perceived consequences of his actions and attitudes.
And the document then goes on to detail some of the tangible, real-world manifestations of this decline in religious authority as it sees it.
Right. It discusses the revolution against the established Islamic clergy in Persia and the subsequent discrediting of their hierarchical structure.
And the collapse of the Muslim caliphate in Turkey.
Yes, and the subsequent and quite radical secularization of the country is presented as a major example.
Okay.
And the document once again references Baha'u'llah's prophecy concerning Constantinople within this context.
Turning to the Christian world, the document examines the various challenges confronting Christian ecclesiastical orders. What does it point to there?
A perceived decline in their influence, their power, their prestige, as well as, dwindling congregations in many places.
And Baha'u'llah's direct communications to patriarchs and archbishops are mentioned.
They are, with metaphorical comparisons drawn to fallen stars and thick clouds, symbolizing a perceived loss of spiritual guidance and societal influence.
And the document outlines a series of historical events as supporting evidence for this decline in Christian authority.
Yes, quite a list. The loss of the Pope's temporal authority, the rise of anti-clerical sentiment in places like France, the persecution of the Orthodox Church in Soviet Russia, the fragmentation of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the separation of church and state in Spain, the growing difficulties faced by missionary efforts in various parts of the world, and even the emergence of modern forms of paganism.
It's a pretty comprehensive list of challenges faced by organized religion in the modern era as viewed through the lens of this document.
It even touches upon what it sees as the inherent contradiction of Christian nations engaging in warfare against one another.
Yeah, that's a powerful point.
Further highlighting a perceived fracturing of religious unity and authority.
The document concludes this section with Baha'u'llah's final appeal to Christians in his tablet addressed to Pope Pius IX, drawing that distinction.
Right, the one between Jesus' early mission of being fishers of men
and the Baha'i mission, which it characterizes as being quickeners of mankind. That's a significant distinction the document emphasizes.
It is. And from this examination of the perceived decline in both temporal and religious authority, the document transitions to offer a broader perspective. It delves into what it identifies as the underlying spiritual crisis affecting humanity, while simultaneously presenting a message of hope for the future.
So how does the document explain this widespread global turmoil that it has been describing? What's the root cause in its view?
It presents the world-afflicting ordeal, the various conflicts and societal challenges of the past century or so as a form of divine judgment. Arising from humanity's collective rejection of Baha'u'lláh, as the document argues. It pinpoints what it terms 3 false gods that it argues are being actively worshipped in place of the one true God.
Okay, 3 false gods. What exactly are these, according to the document?
They are identified as rampant nationalism, destructive racialism, and the atheistic ideology of communism. The document argues that these secular ideologies have gained prominence and exerted a dominant influence, often eclipsing fundamental spiritual principles and leading to conflict and suffering.
And what is the alternative? What are the core principles that Baha'u'lláh offers as a counter to these destructive forces?
The document stresses the healing, saving, pregnant truths brought by Baha'u'lláh, with particular emphasis on the fundamental principle of the oneness of humanity.
That's it.
Absolutely central. It quotes key passages like, "The world is but one country, and ye are the fruits of one tree," to clearly illustrate this unifying theme.
The document also discusses the weakening of the pillars of religion as contributing to a significant moral decline in society, doesn't it?
It does, pointing to issues like increasing lawlessness, the rise of addiction, pervasive materialism, a decline in traditional moral values, and even a deterioration in the quality of literature and art. It paints a rather sobering picture.
It does. The consequences of this perceived spiritual crisis.
However, and this is crucial, the document also introduces the concept of divine chastening as ultimately an act of love.
Love, how so?
As a necessary process to prepare humanity for a more profound and unified future.
Yeah.
It quotes Baha'u'llah's powerful and somewhat paradoxical statement, "My calamity is my providence. Outwardly it is fire and vengeance, but inwardly it is light and mercy."
That's quite a statement. Outwardly fire and vengeance, inwardly light and mercy. So this period of significant global upheaval isn't viewed merely as punishment, but rather as a transformative transition.
Precisely. The document articulates that this tumultuous era is a necessary, albeit painful, stage in humanity's collective journey towards a new and more integrated world order.
And within this context, the document shares some of Baha'u'llah's prophecies concerning this future.
Yes, such as the establishment of the Most Great Peace and the emergence of a new global order that will replace the old following a period of universal convulsion.
A universal convulsion.
Yes, there are prophecies of a Son of Justice rising to illuminate the world and the earth yielding its noblest fruits. The vision of Abdullah Baha, Baha'u'llah's son and successor, concerning the future unification of humanity into a single nation, adhering to one religion and recognizing one race, is also highlighted.
The document even characterizes our present era as humanity's collective adolescence, doesn't it?
It does, a necessary stage of development marked by both challenges and immense potential before reaching full maturity.
And this anticipated great age, what's that envisioned as?
A time characterized by universal peace and genuine unification. The document asserts the belief that the faith of Baha'u'lláh and its unique administrative structure serve as the very instruments through which this global commonwealth will ultimately be realized.
It draws an analogy between the gradual organic evolution of human society, from families to tribes to nations,
Right.
and the progressive nature of divine revelation, suggesting that spiritual understanding unfolds in stages over time.
And the teachings of Baha'u'lláh regarding the gradual unveiling of God's word are emphasized alongside Abdullah Baha's explanations of humanity's collective attainment of maturity.
And the inadequacy of past approaches.
And the inadequacy of past approaches to global governance? Yes.
Yeah.
The development of a global consciousness of the oneness of mankind is reiterated as the central and defining characteristic of this particular stage of divine revelation.
And that key distinction is made again between the primary focus of past religious traditions on individual spiritual redemption,
Right.
and the central emphasis of the Bahá'í Faith on the fundamental unity of all humankind. That fishers of men versus quickeners of mankind idea.
Exactly. It echoes that earlier contrast. Furthermore, the document includes Abdullah Baha's insightful observations on how modern advancements in communication technologies are facilitating unprecedented levels of global unity and interdependence.
How so?
Using the powerful analogy of continents merging and highlighting various unifying forces, such as increased political interconnectedness and global trade, things that just weren't possible before.
Right, the world shrinking.
In a sense, yes. And to really provide a compelling vision of this future interconnectedness, the document presents Abdullah Baha's concept of the 7 candles of unity.
The 7 candles, what are they?
Political unity, unity of thought, unity of freedom, unity of religion, unity of nations, unity of races, and unity of language.
Wow, that's a powerful and evocative image of a unified global civilization.
It is, and the document firmly states the conviction that this era of world unity will be securely established within this very century, quoting Baha'u'llah's directive to love the entire world, not merely one's own nation.
So, The overarching message seems to be that despite the current global challenges and turmoil, the universal convulsion, humanity is inexorably moving towards a greater state of interdependence and ultimate unity. And that the Bahá'í Faith, in this view, offers both an explanation for the current chaos and a blueprint for the future.
A blueprint for the future lesser peace, which is seen as a state of political unity and the ultimate most great peace. A condition of spiritual and social harmony under Baha'u'llah's spiritual sovereignty.
So the current struggles are interpreted as the painful but ultimately necessary birthing pangs of this nascent global order.
Precisely. That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so to bring it all together, we've explored this document's perspective on the initial widespread rejection of what it presents as a transformative divine message.
That's right, the initial resistance.
Yeah. The dramatic consequences it posits for those in positions of power, both political and religious, who chose to ignore it.
The retributive justice aspect.
And the overarching vision of hope it offers for the future, a future characterized by global unity as the ultimate destiny of this tumultuous period in human history.
And that leads us to a final, perhaps provocative thought for you, our listener.
Yeah.
Considering this historical trajectory as outlined in The Promised Day Has Come, what role might you see yourself playing in these ongoing birthing pangs of a potential new world order?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What responsibility, if any, does each individual bear in recognizing and actively contributing to a more unified and peaceful future for humanity?
It's a deep question.
It's certainly a topic worth further contemplation. If you found this deep dive into the perspectives offered by The Promised Day Has Come as thought-provoking as we did, we definitely encourage you to delve deeper into the material.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps seek out the full text of the document itself, or explore further the historical figures and events that were mentioned in our discussion today.